Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the English Eerie 2nd edition storytelling game of rural horror for 1 to 4 players. If you haven't seen the other parts of this review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about the rest of the book. I am going to talk about the mechanics, the scenarios, and I am going to give you my final thoughts on this storytelling game. Let's talk about the story deck. This is the engine that drives the narrative and pace of the game. When it comes to the 5 story element cards, you have clues. They provide some insight into the nature of the horror the protagonist faces. This could be an ancient map at the back of a bookcase, or a candle that is swiftly snuffed out in an empty room. Remember, these are mechanical categories when it comes to the narrative elements of the game. Then we have environment obstructs. These are cards that reflect the power of the landscape, or unfortunate occurrences that aren't directly brought about by other characters. This could be a wild boar on a rampage, or simply a thick fog descending over the protagonist. Then we have secondary character harmed. These sorts of cards denote a scene where a character other than the protagonist was harmed physically or otherwise. Scenarios don't have a list of story elements for this. Players should look at the list of characters and the situation to determine how a secondary character might come to harm. Then we have secondary character obstructs. This sort of card is another obstacle that must be overcome with a roll equal to or above the number on the card on a d10. In this scene, another character actively gets in the way of the protagonist and their goal. Then we have the Grey Lady. The Grey Lady card is a turning point in the story, denoting a scene where the tension rises. When a Grey Lady is drawn, consult the tension table to see an outline of what happens. Now let's talk about playing the game, specifically the flow of play. Games of English Eerie follow a similar flow, whether you're playing alone or with a group. The basic framework of play is reveal a story element card from the story deck on the narrative track. Then you determine how the story element on the card affects the protagonist. Then you make a roll if an obstacle is revealed and spend resolve where desired. You note down the outcome in your journal, or narrate the outcome aloud to the group. Then you reveal the next card on the narrative track. If you are playing in a group, determine the first player to be the active narrator. The active narrator reveals the card, makes any rolls, determines the outcome of the scene, makes rolls to overcome obstacles, and determines how resolve is spent. Other players are encouraged to help out the active narrator by making suggestions, but the active narrator always has final say. While playing solo, obviously the sole player is always the active narrator. When it's time to move on and reveal the next card, the player to the left of the current active narrator becomes the new active narrator. You pass a token around to remember which player is the active narrator. When it comes to revealing scenes and storytelling, English Eerie is played by revealing cards which correspond to scenes in your story. You start the game by revealing the top card of the story deck and putting it at the side of the deck in the play area. This is the first scene, and it starts the narrative track. The image on the card will determine the type of scene your protagonist will be a part of. Look at the scenario you are playing, and read the list of story elements that relates to the card you have chosen. You can use any of these elements to help you create a narrative, but if inspiration strikes, you're free to invent your own. If the scene involves an obstacle, you will need to attempt to overcome it. Once you have decided on what happens in the scene and overcome any obstacles, you write this down in your journal if you're playing solo, or narrate the outcome if you're in a group. Then reveal the next card and place it next to the previous card on the narrative track. The new scene should relate in some way to the last. It shouldn't be a random scene. Now, concerning overcoming obstacles, some story elements in the scenario are known as obstacles. As can be inferred, these are story elements that get in the way of the protagonist, stopping them from achieving their goals. There are 2 types of obstacles: secondary character obstructs and environment obstructs. Each of these cards has a number on it. When revealed, the protagonist must attempt to overcome the obstacle standing in their way. To do this, the active narrator rolls a d10. If the result is equal to or higher than the number on the card, the protagonist has successfully overcome the obstacle. If the result is lower, they are hindered in some way and must lose one spirit. A hindrance does not mean a complete halt of the narrative, rather, it represents a new problem for the protagonist. The player may spend a point of resolve to help overcome an obstacle. If you are playing in a group, the active narrator has the final say in spending points. Concerning duplicate cards, sometimes chance will have it that you will reveal two of the same card in a row. This is usually fine, but the active narrator can choose to hold the duplicate card and draw a new card for the narrative track. On the next turn, the held card should be played. When it comes to time, every 2 cards revealed counts as a day in your journal. The only time this isn't the case is when the final Grey Lady is revealed. The last Grey Lady represents an entire day in your journal. If you are playing solo, it is recommended that you play the game over a series of real nights, giving you a chance to ruminate over the story and come up with new ideas throughout the day. This also adds to the immersion of the game. Now let's talk about revealing a Grey Lady. Grey Ladies represent a notable event in the story and an increase in tension. When a Grey Lady is revealed, read the tension table in the scenario to determine the event that occurs, starting with the first event and moving to the second when the next Grey Lady is revealed, and so on. This is usually left fairly ambiguous, so you can be as creative as possible when telling your story. To simulate the creeping increase in horror, when a Grey Lady is revealed, the active narrator must either spend a resolve point or lose spirit. If you cannot lose any more spirit points, you still remain at 0 spirit and must spend resolve if you have any remaining. When it comes to increasing tension, as the narrative moves along, the tension of the story will rise to simulate the protagonist falling deeper and deeper into a realm of terror and things becoming ever more hopeless for them. In the game, this is known as increasing tension. For every Grey Lady on the narrative track, you add 1 to the target number of any obstacle. So a scene with a card number of 6 would increase to 8 if there were 2 Grey Ladies on the narrative track already. Because of this, failure is more common as the story progresses. Now, concerning ending the scenario, every horror story must come to an end, and rarely does this happen happily. Once the final Grey Lady is revealed and the scene resolved, you count up your remaining spirit points and refer to the spirit table in the scenario. This will tell you how you can wrap up the tale. Generally, if you have spirit left, you will be presented with a more positive ending, but if you have 0 spirit, you will be doomed. There is no bad ending, just the ending there needs to be for your story. Feel free to change the ending based on your tale. The spirit table is only a suggestion. I would recommend that if you want to randomize things further, when you are creating a scenario, or if you are playing one of the included scenarios, you could use a table, perhaps a horror table from an Oracle or some sort of Game Master emulator, to randomize the ending that you will get depending on your score of spirit. Now let's talk about storytelling advice. This book contains a section with very useful tips and guidelines on how to use the play sheet, how to bring fears into play, handling all sorts of things, for example, agoraphobia, snakes, technology, thunder, fire, death, darkness. It depends on the scenario, but it is all usually colored by the trappings of rural horror storytelling. Then we have information on utilizing defining features. In English Eerie, defining features can be anything that sets the protagonist apart. This could be something as inane as always wears red, to carries around their mother's ashes. Each feature tells you a little something about your protagonist. Then again, a defining feature could be a good excuse for your protagonist to get into trouble. Then we have narration tips, such as drawing a blank. All the best storytellers have writer's block every now and then, and sometimes you just can't think of a good idea, even with the prompts you are given. If you are playing alone, the solution is fairly simple. You take a break and come back to it. However, if you find yourself stumped in a group, then it's easier still. You can ask everyone else for ideas. Or you could use some tables as I mentioned earlier. You should also consider the era of play. Scenarios in English Eerie are set in different periods, demonstrating that the terror in the roots of the English landscape is far older than us humans can conceive. You don't need to be a historian to play, but consider the time the scenario is set. What might be the common fears of that time? What are the technological limitations? So you could play this in a sci-fi sort of scenario if you want. Then they give you examples of solo play, of group play. Then you have tips and advice on how to handle the sensitive subjects or topics when you are playing with different people. But I think this is only going to be useful if you are playing with strangers or in a convention or something like that, because if you are playing with your friends and family, you already know what they like in horror storytelling games. Then you have a section detailing the creation of scenarios. They give you details on how to establish locations, how to create secondary characters, clues, environmental obstacles, secondary character obstacles, tension table, spirit table. Because of the fluctuating resources and the ways that events can unfold in unforeseen ways, this is the perfect storytelling game to play the scenarios that you have created on your own. There will be many surprises and unexpected things. Even though you have established all of those clues, the secondary characters, the source of the horror, you never know how things are going to turn out depending on the challenges and the tasks. And as I mentioned earlier twice, you can use some tables to randomize things even further. Now I'm going to read a bit of the different scenarios, give you a few examples to avoid spoilers, so that way you can take on these scenarios completely fresh. We have the Beast on the Moor scenario. The date is 1907. You take on the role of an antiquarian visiting a friend in an old manor house in Derbyshire. Your friend, Lord Christopher Cunningham, is ailing of late and his mind is deteriorating. He raves much about the sounds on the moors, strange lights, and the shape that he swears he has seen cross his window on a few occasions. You have decided to stay for a week to look after Christopher and help soothe his mind. Then we have the Lost River. The date is 1921. You take on the role of an explorer and an adventurer who has decided to go with 3 friends on a boating holiday down the River Eden in Cumbria. The plan is to take a canoe from the river's source in Mallerstang and sail down to Carlisle, covering around 90 miles in distance. Despite the first few days being pleasant, with little in the way of weather trouble, on the 4th day a mist descends and the world suddenly becomes rather hostile. Then we have the Detox Scenario. The date is 2017. You are reluctantly joining a friend on a trip to a digital detox camp in order to go back to nature and leave any tech at home. The camp is situated in the Yorkshire Dales in the springtime in the middle of nowhere. After arriving at the camp, you are greeted by the charismatic George, who presents himself as a self-styled spiritual guru. While he seems quite eccentric, he is harmless enough, or so you think. And there are plenty more scenarios, such as A Rattle of Chains, The Inn, England's Dark Veins, Renovation, Of Ancient Times, Cuckoo, Plunge. And there are plenty of tips throughout concerning using props, setting the mood, etc. So what do I think of English Eerie 2nd edition? When I compare it to the 1st edition, it certainly has been polished and improved. I really like the reorganization of the book and the new included scenarios, because this is a game of a simple system when it comes to gameplay and character creation. You can play this right away in any meeting with friends. You could run this game straight from the PDF quite easily. You only need a D10 and a set of playing cards. But you could also print this, you can play it however you like. And because as you are revealing cards, many events and elements within the story are going to change, you could play the same scenario a few times, and it will still turn out quite different every time. All of the events, the antagonists, the allies, the ending are going to develop differently. But I would highly recommend that you create your own scenarios and that you use some tables or some sort of randomizing tool in order to add even more spice to the game session. So I highly recommend that you get the English Eerie 2nd edition horror storytelling game. Thank you for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.